My name is Stephen Kariskis. So I became a teacher, a pre-K kindergarten teacher for years, working in schools in Seattle and the Providence, Rhode Island area. But during that time, I met and fell in love with my partner, David. And David was amazing, and he also struggled. And in 2009, he died by suicide. And then that loss really impacted my life. And I just thought, gosh, I really want to understand him even more. Even after he's not here, I want to understand him more. My loss was March 4th of 2009. And, you know, David had, months earlier, David had attempted and put him in the hospital. Actually, the previous year before that, he was getting the first treatment he ever had in his life. He actually tried some other meds that he really hated it, to the point of getting to lithium and all this other stuff, and he hated all of that. And so he went to the treatment program, and he didn't like any of that through that whole thing. I think he at least when he didn't know, or when he was focused, or when he didn't have meds in his system, he had these really high and really lows that I think he had just learned to navigate, part of his, almost like it became a part of him. And when those started to level out, which is what I think everyone hoped for, he didn't like that. It scared him. So he wouldn't take his meds, he wouldn't do all of this. So it was really an ongoing struggle. And of course, it's shocking, everyone uses that language. But I couldn't even grasp it. It took me days to really grasp it. I remember being really numb to the point I wasn't quite sure, this is for days, that I had heard the call, that I understood what had happened, that it made sense. It was a different time period, 2009, so it was about 4 or 5 days later, where I was living in the Numb place, where I checked my email, and I had an email from David that I now know was probably sent maybe about 5 minutes before he died. And the email, there's a piece about saying how much he loved me and things like that, which is powerful. He has some random comment about the TV show Battlestar Galactica that we loved and watched, about I won't be able to watch the final with you. And then he says, because I killed myself. And then the next line, it says, and I expect great things from you. And that's when it hit me. I bawled, and I just bawled, and I couldn't, it was like, okay, that was the last thing I'm ever gonna hear from him. And I just bawled. And then I had to get back to work. I remember like walking and watching myself, like I was on a cloud above myself. And I remember above, like looking down and going, okay, you just gotta get to work. I'd be watching myself physically walk into work. And then I remember many times, like, if the grief became too much, I would go, like, I'd actually watch myself. I felt like I was on a cloud watching me teach. I've never experienced anything else like that in my life, like that numbness, that intensity, the sadness. And the other thing I'll share is that I had such intense anger at times that I don't think was really ever directed at David, but I remember yelling at people. I remember being angry at the system, that like when he had his attempt, that it didn't feel like it was supportive. Even when he went into the treatment program, I was like all confused by all of it. I wasn't getting any support myself. And so I remember being angry there. So I think the hardest part for me was the realization that he didn't exist anymore. Because there were many moments, like I would, you know, he was still present in the place I lived, right? But then I'd be like, wait a minute, he's not there. Or when I would go to this little area he had in the house we had where he did painting, where he painted, his paintings, I was like, oh, none of these are gonna be completed ever. What do I do with these? And he actually one of the pieces of a painting he was working on, he actually, right before he attempted, which is when he had thrown white paint all over it. And I remember looking at it and like saying, I just want to get all that paint off of it to get to the work he was doing. And then that painting still sits in my home right now with the white paint all over, because I decided not to do that because that's where he was. That's the product he created through his own struggles. Because David had his moments. There were days in his struggle that he physically did not get out of bed. And then I'd be at school worried about him, and I'd come back, and so there were these moments of his struggle that after he passed, I was like, what is that about? And so there was a side about, I don't have a partner anymore, and I missed that. And then these moments of relief, and I was so mad at myself for that. But I understand also, in a lot of people who have losses to suicide, sometimes their person is complicated, as every human is complicated, and some of those complications can impact your work, can impact your life. And so I think there's a validity to having a sense of relief, but it's not necessarily, it doesn't lessen your love for them. I also felt like I wanted to protect David, and I wanted to, I didn't want his death to define him. And so when I looked at why I was doing all that, it was shame. I didn't want to tell anyone he died by suicide or mental illness or all this other stuff. And I had to come to a place where I was like, no, I want to tell those stories. And it isn't shameful. Being a gay man in a relationship with another gay man and being part of the LGBTQI community, when I had, not for my life, but in the midst of this loss, in the moment of the loss, I didn't really distinguish. I was just grieving. There was no legality to marriage at that time. So when David died, I had a lot of people that were very flippant about it. And I was so confused by it, but I was in the midst of my grief. People would say like, well, there's a lot of other men out there. I'm like, what are you talking about? Gay marriage wasn't there. I wasn't defined as a legal partner and all these other things. So that bereavement wasn't put in front of me. Bereavement leave wasn't put in front of me. And I remember weeks after David died that another person in the community, another teacher in the community, had a loss of a grandparent. And I remember it being put in a newsletter to support this person who had this loss. I remember having a sign-up sheet to give the family casseroles. And I remember just standing there going, my loss was not it was not put in any sort of, Stephen just lost his partner, so let's support him. I never got a casserole. But I also had people who asked the question straight up to my face, like, oh, did he die because he was gay? I'm like, what are you talking about? First, he didn't die because he was gay. He died because he struggled with a mental illness, right? But second to that, the ignorance to that question of the fact that people don't die by suicide because they're gay, right? They die because of the stigma, because of the minority stressors that are placed on them, the lessening of them as a human, all these other things, that there's a high number of LGBTQIA+, even more, young people dying. Why? Because they're not being loved and cared for. They're being isolated and ostracized. That's why they die, not because of their identity. When I met David, I was a teacher, and it's actually something that he said is one of the qualities that he just fell in love with, about how he was so giving to these kids, and he loved the stories about the kids and all this other stuff. But so then when he died, I sat there and I'm like, I didn't know how to help him. How did I not know how to help him? I'm a school teacher. Am I not trained in this stuff about how to help people in crises and everything else? I'm like, I could not help the person I love the most, other than my family and so on. This person I love the most, I couldn't help them. How can I be a good teacher? And it made me leave the classroom. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And it was such an identity shift. It was such a moment of loss. Again, the loss of David. And now I just lost my profession that I'd chosen, because I had spent so much time making this shift to be a teacher, and now I'm like, who am I? I remember the identity shift of not having David as a partner anymore, and this idea that, it was a time before legal gay marriage, and so we were never legally tied to each other, except when he passed and the credit card companies said I was, right? That's a whole other story, right? But we exchanged rings. And I wore that ring for a very long time, and every time it was like, every time I touch it, every time I move it. And so I finally had to take that ring off, and I couldn't. And I remember the gift, which is actually the ring I have on here right now, it just happens to be here, is that my sisters actually gave me this ring as a gift and asked me if, and said, you know, maybe this is the opportunity to take off David's and know that you have these other people that love you and support you. My father was 86 when he passed, and he had cancer, and he knew he was going to die, and he knew the cancer was terminal, and he created this world where he invited everyone to spend time with him. We all got to talk to him, and he gave me the gift of being able to say, gave us all the gift of being able to say goodbye. That loss actually helped me to give perspective around David, because what I believe now, or what I know now, even through research and so on, is David had something that was terminal, that was out of control, and that he died from that. The only thing that's different is we weren't able to say goodbye. Just like the cancer that my dad had, had taken over his body, this pain and this mental health struggle had taken over David's system. Because the way David died, it's like sometimes the book is not closed, right? Or the chapter, it's maybe a different chapter, but the book is still open on a table. Like with and I shared the story of my father passing, is sometimes I feel like we were able, my dad gave us the gift of closing that book and having it on the shelf to go look at and have happy memories or think about him. But David's book is sometimes always open. 16 years later, I'm still saying David would have loved that. And I take his picture, it's in my suitcase, because in my head, I'm like, if he's never physically got to go there, he's joining me. I have moved forward a lot of ways professionally and so on like that, which is good. But I do think that there are times where I thought about dating and or I've gone on a date and had moments where okay, I'm on this date, this is a brand new human. How do I talk about David? And so I'm like, why is he on my head right now? I got this brand new person. Or I was on a date with someone who we came back to my apartment, and right away, because David is part of my life, there's a picture of David and myself. And he's like, well, who's that? And I'm like, well, that's I think I said partner. That's my partner. He's like, I thought you were single. I'm like, here I am on a second date, and I have to tell the story of my loss, right? So all of that, and sometimes it's easier just to avoid all of that. So yeah, I miss David as a human, who his essence was, who his spirit was, all of the ethos of who his energy was. I miss all of that. But I also miss who I was with him, because for years I felt loved. My idea of finding meaning was, I said, I'm gonna go back to college so that no one else ever has to die by suicide. And my sister's like, ooh, that sounds like a big one. Are you sure about that? And I was like, yes. I remember sitting in a session, like a conference session, with Thomas Joyner, who is one of the leaders in the interpersonal theory of suicide. And I was fanboying him. Like some people follow Taylor Swift, I was following Thomas Joyner, because he gave me understanding why people die by suicide was informing my own grief, but it was also giving me skills to help others. And at one point he's doing a talk, and he says out loud that, I want you to hear that what I'm sharing with you is a theory of suicide. It's a theory. And I went, whoa, wait a minute. It's a theory. And I had a moment of realization sitting there going, wait a minute, here's the leading researcher in this, and he only has a theory. So who am I to say I'm gonna change the world around this? These are theories. I can only do what I can do. And so then the next part of that was saying, okay, what can I do? Who am I? I remember one of the things a big thing I would always teach the kids is how to be a good friend and how to be a good community member. And I would teach them 3 or 4 things. And one was to be a really good listener to their friends. And the other one was how to ask really great questions to build connection. In kindergarten, that might be, do you like pepperoni pizza? I like pepperoni pizza, right? But the third one was how to know who your support people are. Your Mr. K, or the counselor, or the gym teacher, whomever that was, to know that. And what I bring from it, the best practices of suicide prevention are 3 things. Be a really great listener, ask really great questions, and know who the support people are. And I remember having this thought, like, why did I spend all that money? I was a good teacher. I was a good kindergarten teacher. I know how to do this. My time at KEDA up in Maine, the camp for young people, through the time I've been there, 8 years doing support there, they keep growing. And at one point, about a year ago, I had an idea, we keep growing things. We had this idea of creating a program that if people have a loss to suicide, they can reach out, or they can have someone reach out for them, and they can get like a care package. We could send books and resources and blankets, and also connect them to KEDA and other resources. Well, months later, as we finalized the program, the founders of the organization said, we'd like to call the program David Cares. So they named it after David. And it still gets me, because every time I hear about it, I'm like, those people know David's story, they know me, and they care about David to the point that they gave that. I hope that I've created a memory of David and how I want him to remember and how they support me, that my nieces and nephews are telling their grandchildren that you never met your Uncle Stephen, but he had a partner who he loved very much, and they had this great love story, or something like that, right? Knowing that my nieces and nephews who don't really know David care about him because he cared about me. When I think about being a little kid, I remember creating like a classroom at home where I would teach my sisters, and that's who I was when I was a little kid, and that is exactly who I am right now. So I still want to be a teacher in a way, and teach, and I'm teaching them different things now, teaching people different things, but it's still at the root of who I am. I never ever would have thought in my entire existence that I would help to develop and work with a summer camp up in Maine for young people that lost to suicide. There's a bitterness to that. David died, that's why I'm there. There's a sweetness to that when there's an 8-year-old sitting in front of me thanking me and telling me a story about their brother who died by suicide. And I'm giving them comfort, and I'm giving them support, and I'm giving them guidance.